Hey everyone, my name is Alex. Thanks a bunch for checking out my channel, Rocks for Jocks. Please subscribe and like the video if you like it. Today I'm going to be going through the NOAA website. That is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They put out this really cool sea level rise technical report in 2022. Might not be cool to everyone, but it's cool to me. So yeah, I'm just gonna go through a video that they posted with kind of a slide deck showing some of the biggest impacts and takeaways from that report. Yeah, and if we have time, I'm gonna check out some of the applications on their website. So the real meat and potatoes of this report is on this website, sealevel.globalchange.gov. The technical report coming up over here, full report down, click to download it here. But they even did us the service of condensing that down further into a little 7-minute video here. Not going to show you the whole video because the video itself could definitely use an update, and that's what I'm here to do. Kind of run you all through the highlights. There's basically 4 big takeaways that they want you to have from this technical report. Even for us non-technical people, I think it's still pretty cool to get. So yeah, let's go through them. Number 1 is that there's going to be about a foot of sea level rise expected by 2050. And yes, these data sets are a couple years out of date by this point because we're now in 2025 instead of 2022. But the projections for climate change and sea level rise have been really pretty accurate so far over the last few years. So I'm going to assume that this is all still pretty relevant stuff. So number 1 is that there's going to be a foot of sea level rise expected, and that's kind of an average across the United States. What that means is that sea level rise does not take place evenly everywhere. It's not uniform across every single city, across every single state. The Gulf Coast down by Louisiana is going to see the most amount of rise, but some areas have the land itself changing its elevation. So as the sea level changes elevation, the land may also be going up or down. So in comparison to the Gulf Coast, Alaska is on the total other end of the spectrum, where Alaska is going to have some areas where the land is actually rising faster than the sea level is rising. So from Alaska's perspective, the sea level will actually drop a little bit. But if you average that across all, like the perimeter of the US, like the boundaries, it's going to go up by about a foot between now and 2050, or 2022 to 2050. So what this video goes on to say is that we've already seen 10 to 12 inches of rise in sea level from 1920 to 2020. And yeah, we're going to see another 10 to 12 inches in the next 30 years. And within that, there are some projections of basically what happens with different emission scenarios. So if we continue emitting more and more, or if we can start emitting less and less, we're obviously going to get more and less sea level rise, respectively. The second point that the technical report puts together, and that this video spits out really concisely, is that coastal flooding is going to occur more often and cause more damage than it currently does. Hopefully that makes sense intuitively to everyone. So, for example, if sea level rises by a foot and we get a storm that causes 10 inches of flooding, that's going to feel like what 22 inches of flooding feels like right now. In other words, more moderate flooding is going to occur much, much more often than it does today, and more extreme flooding will also occur more often. So point number 3 made by this video is that emissions matter, especially in the long run. What do we mean by this? Well, a lot of our sea level rise is already quote unquote baked in. In other words, that means it's already going to happen no matter how much we change our emissions. In the short term, sea level will continue rising in response to the heating of our atmosphere that has already occurred. That's because the sea level rise is a lagging indicator. In other words, emissions happening is step 1, or climate warming is step 2, and then impacts like sea level rise are step 3, where that happens in response to warming over a period of years. So a lot of our sea level rise is already baked in and going to be happening over the next 10 to 20 years. But not all of it is. If we continue pumping out more and more emissions, that's going to keep having bigger and bigger impacts past 2050, past 2060. So yeah, if you're like myself and hoping to live to 2100 or at least close to 2100, we're going to keep seeing bigger and bigger impacts if we don't cut down on these emissions. So they kind of give a few examples of this and saying this is like our intermediate expectations. Then we get about 4 feet of sea level rise on average across the United States. But if we drastically increase or decrease those emission standards, yeah, we can easily jack that up by 2 more feet or cut it down by about 2 feet. So yeah, in the short run, there's not a ton of wiggle room in terms of sea level rise over the next 10 to 20 years, but in the long run, a huge amount of wiggle room. So that really makes an impact, especially when it comes to stuff like flooding, hurricanes, and other natural disasters. So yeah, here on this slide, they're just making the point that more emissions means more climate warming, and that means more ice sheet melting and more sea level rise. Number 4 is that the sea level is continuing to rise, and we must plan for it across different areas, every region of the country. If you live anywhere near the coast, really got to start getting ready for this kind of stuff if you're a city planner or anything like that. One really good point I found that the video made is that it's really important to consider risk tolerance. So if you're building a single structure and it's cheap and you don't need to keep that structure running 24/7, then maybe you can use the expectations that we're going to have low emissions. Maybe it's okay if the building floods every once in a while and you don't really care about it that much. If it gets destroyed by flooding or a hurricane, wind damage, anything like that, then sure, set your expectations that there's going to be low emissions and low amount of sea level rise. That's fine. If your building gets destroyed, you can just scrap it and start over. But if you're making something really expensive or something crucial to the people, like a hospital, or something that's expected to last decades, so if you are making a giant office building and it's super expensive and you need to make your money back on it over the course of 50 years, you might want to plan for an intermediate or high emissions expectations and intermediate or high sea level rise expectations, because that could make a difference for your building 10 or 20 or 30 years down the line. Their application guide goes into a lot more detail about all of those community impacts and like different risk tolerance levels, where the different tipping points happen. And these are all kind of arbitrarily set, but they're saying here's the different strategies you use. They're going to cost X amount of dollars. But if you expect 2 or 3 or 4 feet of sea level rise, you might want to consider the more expensive strategy now to avoid those more expensive costs later on in life. So then the last thing the video goes through is kind of some of the things that we can do if we're planning a city or a state or just a simple constructing a building. So it goes through some of the things that we can do to prepare for sea level rise. A couple of them are straightforward. So this one is just saying build higher up, build a couple feet off the ground if you can swing it if you're near the coastline. The next one is just building on higher ground. It's supposed to be, building on top of a hill, for example, if you're making a hospital. And then the last one I thought was pretty cool was kind of installing lines of rocks or barriers to try to prevent erosion. And the point of that is when major flooding hits, you want grasses and rocks and dirt to be in the way, to try to basically stop some of that water and keep your properties from taking damage anytime flooding happens. Yeah, so then the rest of this video kind of shows you a handful of the applications that they have on their website. So I'm gonna go through those next. Thanks a bunch for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.